This is Wits Vuvuzela Confessions Line. Please record your confession after the beep.
Is it weird that my boyfriend, who works full-time, expects me to pay for things when I'm still a student? UJ.
Hello, and welcome back to Season 3 of We Should Be Writing. My name is Busisiwe Mdluli, and I am joined by a special guest today, Malaika Ditabo. In this season, we unpack your scandalous and not so scandalous university confessions in association with universityconfessions.za on Instagram. In today's episode, we are taking a deep and non-judgmental dive into Confession 2163, which focuses on the importance of money in a relationship as a university student, employment, communication, expectations, and balance in a relationship. Is it all important? I guess we have a lot to unpack. Let's get straight into it. So we are aware that the confessor is a student, meaning that she probably does not have a job and she's focusing on her studies. Her boyfriend, on the other hand, works full-time, meaning he is not at school and earns himself a salary every month. This already reveals a difference socially. Both are into different chapters of their lives, and that difference is creating a rift. There are key issues that one needs to take into consideration of. Firstly, one needs to ask themselves, what financial responsibilities does the confessor have? She could be using her money on groceries, clothes, toiletries, and accommodation. One also needs to take into consideration that most university students do not have an additional, consistent, and reliable source of income. The South African unemployment rate was reported to be at 33.9%. Therefore, it would be inconsiderate of the confessor's partner to expect the confessor to have a stable and steady income that is ready to be used at any minute of the day. A large number of students rely on their parents or bursaries for fundings. When also one delves deeper into the concept of financial constraints, one needs to think of how the current cost of living is extremely high as inflation has increased to 7.84%.
I absolutely agree with you, Busi. Actually, on that note, outside of financial constraints, we need to have a look at the dynamics of the relationship. Of course, each relationship differs, but I personally believe that a relationship should be 50-50. The boyfriend cannot expect the girlfriend to pay for everything because, she is a student. That would be considerate. He earns money and she doesn't. She's studying, and as you mentioned, there are situations such as unemployment that come into the picture. But yet, I as an individual need to ask myself, before the relationship started, did he communicate his expectations? Has he been vocal about his experience? Why does he expect her to pay for fees and dates? Does he perhaps have too much on his plate? Does he perhaps support his family, pay for his apartment and car? These are situations and topics that should be discussed before getting into a relationship.
Malaika has raised very valid points that one should consider. But also, I should also be able to ask myself that did he confess or inform her of the financial constraints that he was experiencing? Personally, if this was my partner, I would have appreciated if he would have informed me of his financial constraints and that if something was happening in his life, after all, I am his partner, and who else would he speak to if it isn't me?
Yeah, actually, on that note, I was also thinking about how he went into the relationship knowing very well that firstly, she is a student, she isn't working. Like we mentioned, communication is definitely crucial, it's important, and it's key. If you have certain expectations for your partner, you state them and you put them out there. But we also cannot forget about the man. He might have his priorities, he might have some affairs that have really placed him in a really tight spot, but it's not fair for him to expect her to pay for everything. And that's why I think that's why we keep on reiterating that you need to speak to each other for progress to be made, for change to be made, and for peace actually to be in the relationship?
I think you're right. If there's no communication, there will be fighting that will happen within a relationship. I think that we have all experienced in our relationships that when there's no communication, there's always a sense of misunderstanding. And sometimes as an individual, you can get worked up, frustrated, and you want to end up just letting go of your relationship then and there. And my advice to students would be that communicate, like you said. Speak to your partner. Speak to them and find out what is actually bothering them. I mean, if they're going through financial constraints at home and they're unable to speak to their parents about it, maybe you may be able to assist in some regard. And if you can't, that's also okay. But expecting someone to pay for everything, I think expectation also kills relationships. If I'm always expecting someone from something, we're living in a world where people cannot necessarily live up to expectations. You always need to leave room for disappointment in every circumstance. That's just my piece on that.
I really like what you said, actually, because it had me thinking about how society has really placed this huge burden, responsibility upon, especially young people, us as students, this thing of living this luxury, high life, high-end, expensive life, which has resulted in so many of us living beyond our means. I mean, if you cannot afford to go to a certain restaurant, there are spaces that accommodate to students. And I'm not saying do not go, but I am saying if there is no money, if there's no budget to go to these places, why have the expectation that someone else will be able to provide and pay that for you? And I think that's also another thing to consider when in a relationship. And I'm not saying don't get into a relationship if you do not have money, but go into a relationship knowing where you stand financially, where your partner stands, and if you know that you're not prepared to work together and find a way around whatever problem it may be, then rather not waste each other's time. And like Busi mentioned, expectation really is a killer of joy, but also a killer of relationships. And uncommunicated expectations are even worse. So I guess this whole situation is just a matter of knowing your socioeconomic position, understanding your circumstances, understanding each other's circumstances, and respecting the boundaries that you have in place, whether it's financially, emotionally, mentally, whatever. There should be boundaries to ensure that issues like this do not occur and one person is not walking over the other person because they are expecting so much from you.
You know, on that topic, I absolutely agree with you because social media has set such ridiculous standards for people. If it isn't financially, it's probably in terms of body, you name it. There are so many ridiculous standards that have been put out there. And oftentimes I think that as women, I can rather say from my personal experience is that when I see people posting, maybe let's say a partner has bought something for their partner, and there's that sense of, I won't say envy, but that wish that it could happen to me, you know, and I may not take into consideration whether my partner can be able to afford that because that's something that I want, and I want him to be able to, you know, provide that for me. And at the end of the day, we end up not thinking and we end up putting unnecessary pressure, you know, to be the it couple or to be the greatest couple that there possibly is. We forget that every person is just not the same financially. There are people that come from rich backgrounds and there are people that come from poor backgrounds, you know. And my saying is that I have personally been in situations where I couldn't afford not much because after all, I am a student as well. So I can definitely relate to the confessor. But at the same time, I am also guilty of having that expectation on other people. I cannot exclude myself from that as well.
Busi, I really appreciate how honest you are with yourself. I think a lot of people like that honesty. We do have that expectation, and as a result of it, we've seen a lot of women, young girls, having this mentality of a man must, indoda must, which has set these really high expectations for these working class men, in which young girls are now dating much older men to accommodate and maintain these expectations and lifestyles. And I feel like dating shouldn't be about that. Dating is more than money. It's more than going out. It's more than, it is inclusive of those things, but it's not solely based on those factors. So, yeah.
I think many of the standards that I've seen, especially the a man must, it's mainly on Twitter, if we're being quite honest. It really is mainly on Twitter, where people come onto Twitter to say whatever it is that they want about how they expect people to do A, B, and C for them. And on the note of young women dating elder men, I may not necessarily know the nitty-gritty or the real details, but it is quite sad to see young women who are full of potential, who are able to work for themselves and do better for themselves. And I understand that maybe it sounds so easy to say because some really do come from poor backgrounds.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to say that if you know that you can do well for yourself, if you know that you are you can be an independent woman, then please do not rely on elderly men to do things for you, because the consequences are dire. He could turn around and expect things now from you because you now have to give up yourself to this elder man. You may have to sleep with him. You may have to do things that compromise your integrity as a woman. It's something that I personally do not advise to any young woman to do that. Because you want that LV bag, that Gucci bag, or whatever. And also because you also want to live up to the social media standards of having everything, of having a man that can do everything for you. Okay. I'm not saying that you should date someone whom, you would say is in your own terms broke. Everyone has their preferences. That's fine. I'm not going to judge you on that. But I'm just saying that be independent for yourself. Do not rely on a man to do things for you or to, be expecting all these things, because in the end, it may have dire consequences for you as an individual.
Definitely. Now back to the confession and the initial problem at hand. Let's offer some advice on how exactly the student can go about dealing with a boyfriend who expects that much from her.
Personally, I think that partnerships are a two-way street. When speaking to your partner, do not be shy about your concerns. Let him know exactly how you feel, because your feelings as an individual matters too. If, of course, your partner invalidates your feelings after the conversation, then it would be quite clear that he is not a considerate man. He does not value you or your feelings. My advice then would be to leave that man alone, girl.
Just drop him, huh? And I agree with you. If communication doesn't work, then dip. Leave the situation. Exit. But also advise you to also try and understand where he's coming from. I believe we did mention that earlier in the conversation, and see if he's willing to be accommodative and change his ways. I mean, if someone loves you, they would make the effort, they will go the extra mile and, make that effort and be considerate of your current situation as a student. And also just try to talk to him about his financial situation on this.
There are certain things that you're able to contribute towards and other things that you're unable to do. And that is why it is important to remember, once again, that a relationship is a two-way street. When having this discussion with him, the both of you can try and brainstorm ideas as to, firstly, how to deal with the matter, because each person has their own idea of how to work their relationship. You guys can jot down your ideas as to what you guys can pay for. For example, you can say that maybe for the next date, he will pay for it, and the following date will be paid by you. What you can also do is go 50-50 on the date. If, for example, you guys are out watching a movie, one person can pay for the movie tickets, and the other person can pay for the snacks. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening to this podcast and giving us an ear for today. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Wits Vuvuzela. Stay tuned for our next set of confessions. I thank you.